So without any further ado, I am going to call up Marion Scrymgour, who is the CEO of the Northern Land Council. And Marion has got an incredible story to share with us, her personal story of where she got to today, because we all know our land councils are very much male dominated, and also her time when she was Deputy Chief Minister for the NT government and the highest ranking Aboriginal politician in Australia at that time. So come on down, Marion.
I acknowledge the Larrakia, on whose country I've been privileged to call home nearly all of my life, and where my children and grandchildren still live. A beautiful place. And I hope that I can finish this so I don't have Christine standing there with the clapsticks and coming, but I think even more intimidating standing beside me and saying, move over. But I want to acknowledge all of my countrymen. I am a Tiwi Islander, but for many people who don't know, I'm also a Madjara from my father's side, who was part of the stolen generation and taken back, and we've been fortunate that we've been able to reconnect with his family and others, and what we've found as well as Tiwi, a very strong culture amongst Madjara people. So, Miradui from my mother's side, and as the Walpri people often tell me when I talk to them, Naparula from my father's side. So very proud of both of those races. We all know, and I'll try and hurry through this, each Aboriginal family has its own stories of the struggles that our parents, grandparents and great-grandparents have had to face and overcome. When we look at our history, we acknowledge and recognise that in the real world, and I have to tell you, I know we've got some media people, and my advisors are probably going to have a meltdown because I did this speech. None of them have seen it, and sometimes it causes some problems when I'm given a microphone. But anyway, let's see what happens and let's go. We acknowledge and recognise that in the real world, when everyday people are confronted by oppressively difficult circumstances, they somehow learn to adapt and endure. Heroism is mostly demonstrated by survival, with the occasional act of personal defiance thrown in the link. We all saw the images and reports last week of the 3 young women and the coronial inquest into their completed suicides. Depressing, yes. Enraging, yes. Another instance of fundamental failure of the systems that should protect these young women. The responses, as always, sorry. I agree with the mother of one of those young women. Sorry is not good enough. That insight has particular resonance when considering the profile and the status of our women in society. As women, we've had to prioritise adaptation and endurance because, as well as looking out for ourselves, our women have had to look after the children who it is their primary role to safeguard. When I make those comments in relation to women generally, you can multiply them 100 times when you apply them to the experience of Aboriginal women in this country. Although I'll restrict myself to the Northern Territory because that's where I'm from and the area about which I can speak with confidence and authority. To a significant extent, the popular impression of Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory is one of social dysfunction, aggravated by alcohol misuse, drugs and family violence. In the perception of many, the picture is one of overwhelming failure and distress, with strong Aboriginal women as the last bastion of defence. Although there is no avoiding the realities of alcohol misuse, drugs and family violence, and the role played by strong women is not a mere stereotype, great care should be taken not to generically denigrate Aboriginal men. A great many of them are trying to do the right thing and they need all the encouragement they can get. The problem with blanket negativity is that it can often result in self-fulfilling prophecies. I want to tell some positive stories of women, and women who have had an impact on my life, It would be easy for me to try and focus on me, and I hate doing that. But there have been a number of women who have had significant impacts on my life, and I look at them, and they've done this without the fanfare. They've led constructive and exemplary lives. We just have to look around this room, and I think, as Christine said, there are, you look at the faces, you look at the people who have contributed to the Northern Territory, and it is significant. I look at these young women and I can see my granddaughters sitting here, the next generation of the young women who have to stand with me, and there is hope. And I think when we look at our young people, our young women, there is hope. And so I applaud and I acknowledge all these young women that are sitting in this room, because without you, that future's not there. And they're the ones that we need to nurture, we need to develop, and we need to make sure that they're strong. We need to look after our elders, of course, because that's the knowledge, the wisdom, and the basis under which our families are built. But we also have to acknowledge and build and support those young people through that, because the world is often one where it's easy to tear someone down. And we all know, and I often use the analogy of the crabs in the mud in the bucket. It's all too easy to often pull each other down. It's harder to lift and keep ourselves up. So for our young women, thank you. It's great to see you all here. I think it is really important. We need to promote and focus on our women, because historically Aboriginal women have been subjected to various forms of discrimination and inequality, because the happiness, health and autonomy of women are of fundamental importance. They are the foundation stone for building successful and socially responsible families. Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory have undergone a number of significant transitions since the middle of last century, and it has been Aboriginal women who have borne the brunt of demands and downsides of some of those changes. But the example of the women I'm going to speak about, two in particular, should give us hope and confidence in the capacity of Aboriginal women that can adapt and endure into the future. I've often talked about my mother, but there are I think, and for my grandchildren, I've shared those stories and I'll continue to share those stories. I'm very conscious of Christine, and I don't want her to clap those sticks on me. But the first person I want to talk about is, and I've already mentioned, before I went into politics, I spent a fair bit of time working in the health sector, and not as a clinician, but working with communities to take Northern Territory government-run clinics and transitioning them to community control. So building the capacity of Aboriginal people to make sure that they are in a good position to take control of their own destinies and health services. And Katherine West, so if anyone knows the Katherine region, the three services that I had a hand in is the Wurli Wurlunjang Health Service, Sunrise Health Service, and the last one to develop and hand over was the Katherine West Health Board. And that then allowed my segue into politics for 12 years. So in that time, I met a number of fantastic people who were my mentors and teachers. One of them, Jack Little, and I don't know if any of you have been around the Northern Territory. Jack Little is, an icon in himself and someone who everybody worships and respects. But there was a woman that was there, and she played a significant, and she had quite an impact on me. And her name was Helen Morris. And at the time, she was a senior health worker at a clinic in Dangura, which is the home of Vincent Lingiari and the place which prides itself as being the birthplace of land rights. Helen spoke fluent Warlpiri and Gurindji and was, and it still is, if you mention her name, a respected elder in that region. She was probably the most skilled and respected health professional that I've seen come out of the bush. The transition of clinics to community control was a success, and it was a success not because of Marion Scrymgour or government, it was a success because of people like Helen Morris. The Catherine West Health Board went from strength to strength, but Helen's health during that time had deteriorated and culminating in renal failure. She had to be on daily dialysis in one of the main territory population centres, and in a kind of reprise of her role in the establishment of Catherine West Health Board, what Helen has now been doing, together with some of the senior Aboriginal people from Larjamanu, Kalkaringi, Dangura, she helped set up the Kura Aboriginal Corporation, which was looking at establishing home dialysis in those communities so that countrymen could go back home rather than staying in Catherine. She was a key contributor to a scoping study conducted in 2010 and the push for fully funding in some home dialysis models, which the Commonwealth Government is now funding. So all the while, Helen did the hard yards as a mother and a grandmother, but she also held up the health of her community. She sadly passed away a few years ago from end-stage renal disease, and that is often the story of many of our pioneering women who have worked hard to get services on the ground. The other person I want to just quickly touch on is Esther Dangura, has for many years now been the principal of the school at Goombalanya. Goombalanya is a community of several hundred people situated on the floodplains across the East Alligator River in Kakadu National Park. It is cut off and accessed by road for at least a couple of months a year. Esther and I were friends well before I was elected, but it took 11 years, which followed for me, to fully understand and appreciate the achievements that her career represented and the considerable sacrifices that that lady had to take. In order to become a teacher, then a school principal, she had to leave her community where her family and extended family were and attend secondary school in Darwin. She had to then go to university and obtain formal tertiary qualifications as a teacher. All the while, she maintained and developed her linguistic and cultural knowledge. While her main language in the Goombalanya area is Kunwinku, Esther speaks and understands many related languages. She can explain the nuances and differences between the various languages within the group of languages which were traditionally spoken between Kakadu and the Arnhem Land Plateau. And there are very few people left who can share that knowledge. She brought that mainstream qualification back to her community, and she still, to today, attempts to get the generation of children across the bridge to literacy and numeracy, while at the same time ensuring that they applied themselves to properly learning their own language and culture. She's up against petrol sniffing and other issues that happen in the community, but she's up against an entrenched racist view within government agencies that it took over nearly 20 years for Esther to get into the position that she has, even though she trained every principal, deputy principal that came into that school, non-Indigenous person. It was Esther that trained them and took them through that. So it was her knowledge that they were taking, But like all our women in our remote communities, she has persevered. And I just want to quote what she sent to me. She's always said this: I'm from here and I went away and I got educated, but I had wonderful relatives, old people who worked with me. And that resonated. I think Chrissy talked about her grandmothers, and Esther that's deep within her, is all of those old people. I didn't organise to be a principal. They did. It's satisfying. It is a long way I had to go to be a principal. It is a lot of pressure, a lot of hurdles, but I had to be strong to be able to be where I am today. Not an easy task. As I said, and I'll conclude quickly because I've got the first tap, when invited to be a guest speaker, thinking what I wanted to talk about, whether it was about myself, but I wanted to talk about something real, something that was from my world and something that was positive. I wanted to talk about those two women, and I've often talked about them because they are my heroes. They stand in the same stature as my mother, who I've watched work and toil until her death. And I hope that sharing some fragments of their lives with you will give you some insight into the challenges facing Aboriginal women in the Northern Territory, both in the past and the present. I commend their example to all our women, like yourselves, all of you in this room who work tirelessly for our people, for better policy and services, but more in particular, equity and justice. Thank you.